The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles filled the house, the kind of smell that usually makes you feel safe, like no matter what's wrong in your life, Christmas dinner will fix it for a few hours. That night, I believed that lie too. I sat at the long dining table, hands folded in my lap, listening to forks clink against plates and soft holiday music humming in the background. The lights on the tree blinked gently, and for a moment, everything looked perfect. Then my mom cleared her throat, looked straight at me, and said words that would change the way I saw my family forever. "You've never contributed anything," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room went quiet in a way that felt heavy, like the air itself was judging me. My cousins froze mid-bite. My uncle stared down at his plate. My dad didn't say a word. My mom's eyes didn't soften, not even a little. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a statement she had been holding on to, waiting for the right moment to release. And somehow, she chose Christmas dinner. I smiled. That part surprised even me. My lips curved upward like I'd just heard something polite, something normal. Inside, though, my chest burned. My heart thumped so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to list every sacrifice, every quiet effort, every time I showed up without being asked. But I didn't. I just smiled, nodded slightly, and went back to my food as if nothing had happened. From the outside, I probably looked calm. From the inside, something was breaking and settling into place at the same time. My family has always loved Christmas. Growing up, my mom made it feel like the most important day of the year. Matching pajamas, group photos, big meals, and long conversations that stretched late into the night. She taught us that family meant loyalty, that love meant giving without keeping score. I believed her. I really did. I grew up trying to be the helpful one, the reliable one, the child who didn't cause trouble. I thought that counted for something. But as I sat there that night, chewing food I could barely taste, I realized how invisible quiet effort can be. Especially in families where loud opinions get more attention than silent support. My mom went on talking, not directly to me anymore, but about responsibility and pulling your weight. Her words floated around the table like smoke, stinging my eyes even when she wasn't looking at me. Every sentence felt like it was aimed in my direction. It wasn't just criticism. It felt like a verdict she had already decided on long ago. What hurt the most wasn't the comment itself. It was the timing. Christmas dinner is supposed to be about gratitude, about togetherness. Instead, it became a stage for humiliation. I wondered if she had rehearsed that line in her head. I wondered how long she had believed it. I wondered if anyone else at the table agreed with her and had just never said it out loud. I glanced around, hoping someone would defend me, even casually. A joke. A change of subject. Anything. But no one did. Silence can be louder than words, and that silence told me everything I needed to know about my place in that room. I thought about all the times I helped without being asked. The errands, the emotional support, the late-night conversations where I listened while others talked. I thought about the dreams I put on hold because family came first. None of that seemed to count. Not to her. Not in that moment. That's when something inside me shifted. I realized I had been trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided how they saw me. And no amount of explaining or defending myself at that table was going to change that. If I spoke up, it would turn into an argument. If I stayed quiet, it would look like agreement. Either way, the damage was done. So, I chose a third option. I smiled, finished my meal, and stopped. Not stopped eating. Not stopped being polite. I stopped offering explanations. I stopped shrinking myself to keep the peace. I stopped trying to earn appreciation from people who only noticed what they thought was missing. In that moment, surrounded by Christmas decorations and forced cheer, I made a decision that felt small but carried a lot of weight. My mom noticed my smile and paused, almost confused. Maybe she expected tears. Maybe she expected an apology. Maybe she expected me to finally argue back. Instead, she got calm. And calm can be unsettling when someone expects a reaction. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Dessert was served. Gifts were exchanged. Laughter returned in pieces. uneven and strained. On the outside, it looked like a normal family Christmas. On the inside, I was already somewhere else, quietly stepping away from a version of myself that had spent years trying to be enough. That night, lying in bed, I replayed her words over and over. "You've never contributed anything." They echoed in the dark, but each time they came back, they sounded a little weaker. Not because they hurt less, but because I was starting to see them for what they were. Not the truth. Just her truth. And those are not always the same thing. I didn't know yet what stopping would look like. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't keep giving in the same way and expect a different result. A Christmas dinner had exposed something I could no longer ignore. Sometimes the people closest to you benefit the most from your silence, and they get uncomfortable when that silence changes. The next morning, the house was quiet. Wrapping paper littered the floor, and the tree lights were still on, glowing softly in the early light. My mom moved around the kitchen like nothing had happened. No apology. No follow-up. Just normal conversation, as if her words hadn't landed like a crack in the foundation of our relationship. That's when I understood something important. This story wasn't just about one comment at a Christmas dinner. It was about years of unspoken expectations, about being taken for granted, about what happens when you finally stop over-explaining your value. And the part that came next, that's where everything really changed. I didn't confront my mom that morning. I didn't bring up Christmas dinner or ask her what she meant. I watched her pour coffee into her favorite mug, the one with a small crack along the handle, and move through the kitchen like everything was fine. That normalcy felt strange, almost unsettling. It made me question myself for a second, like maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But the tight feeling in my chest reminded me it was real. Growing up, my mom was the loudest voice in our house. Not in a cruel way, at least not on the surface. She was confident, decisive, and always sure she knew what was best. People admired her for that. Friends would say, "Your mom is so strong," or "She really runs things."
And she did.
My dad rarely challenged her. He worked long hours and came home tired, choosing peace over disagreement. I learned early that speaking up only mattered if it matched what she already believed. I became the easy one. The child who didn't argue, who adapted, who filled the gaps without being asked. If something needed to be done, I did it. If someone needed help, I showed up. I thought that was what contributing looked like. Not loud success or grand gestures, but steady presence. Over time, that became my role in the family, so familiar that no one noticed it anymore. That's why her words at Christmas dinner hit so hard.
They didn't just criticize me.
They erased years of quiet effort in one sentence. As the day went on, I started noticing small things I had ignored before. How my mom asked my sibling for opinions, but told me what to do. How she praised others openly, but corrected me privately. Or sometimes publicly. How my help was expected, but my absence would be questioned. It was like someone had turned the volume up on details I had trained myself not to hear. Later that afternoon, my aunt pulled me aside while we were clearing dishes. She lowered her voice and said, "You okay?" Her eyes lingered on my face, searching. I smiled again, the same polite smile from the night before, and said I was fine. She nodded, but her expression didn't change. It was the kind of look that said she knew something was wrong, but didn't feel comfortable naming it. That moment stayed with me. Even when people sense unfairness, they often choose comfort over honesty. And I had been doing the same thing my whole life. Over the next few days, the house slowly emptied. Relatives left. The decorations stayed up, but the energy shifted. Without the audience of Christmas dinner, my mom didn't repeat her comment. She didn't apologize either. It was as if she believed the message had been delivered and didn't need revisiting. I started pulling back in small ways. Not dramatically. I still helped around the house, still answered questions, still showed up. But I stopped filling every silence. I stopped jumping in before being asked. I listened more than I spoke. And I noticed how uncomfortable that made her. She began asking questions that sounded casual but weren't. "Why are you so quiet lately? Is something wrong? Did I say something?" Each time, I told her I was just tired. That wasn't a lie. Emotional exhaustion has a way of settling into your bones. At night, I lay awake replaying old memories through a new lens. Moments I once brushed off now felt heavier. Comments about my choices. Comparisons I pretended not to hear. Praise that always came with a condition. I wondered when I had started believing that love had to be earned through usefulness. The tension in the house grew, subtle but constant. My mom's tone sharpened when she spoke to me. My dad noticed, but stayed quiet like always. I could tell he didn't want to get in the middle. That hurt too in a different way. Silence can feel like abandonment when you're the one being misunderstood. One evening, my mom brought up money at the dinner table. Not accusingly, but pointed enough to make her meaning clear. She talked about expenses, about effort, about how everyone needs to step up at some point in their life. She didn't say my name, but she didn't have to. The words hung between us, heavy and familiar. I felt the old urge rise up, the need to explain myself, to defend my contributions, to prove I wasn't a burden. My heart raced as I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I remembered the smile at Christmas dinner. I remembered the decision I made that night. And I stayed quiet. That silence changed something. My mom looked at me longer than usual, like she was waiting for the argument that never came. I could see confusion flicker across her face, followed by irritation. People who are used to controlling the narrative don't like when the other person stops playing their part. Later, alone in my room, I wondered if I was being unfair. If maybe I really hadn't done enough.
Self-doubt is sneaky that way.
It creeps in when you've been questioning yourself for years. But then I thought about how contribution isn't always visible. How emotional labor rarely gets counted. How being reliable can turn into being invisible. The days blurred together, each one carrying the same quiet tension. My mom watched me closely now. I watched her too. We were both aware that something had shifted, but neither of us named it. It felt like standing on opposite sides of a bridge, unsure who would take the first step. I didn't know where this was heading. I didn't know what would happen if I kept stopping. I only knew that going back to how things were felt impossible. Christmas dinner had cracked something open, and once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. There was a conversation coming. I could feel it. Something was building beneath the surface, waiting for the wrong moment or the right one. And when it finally happened, I wasn't sure whether it would bring clarity or completely change my place in the family. The real shift didn't come with an argument. It came with distance. Not physical distance, but emotional space that kept growing between my mom and me. We were still in the same house, still sharing meals, still exchanging polite words, but it felt like we were speaking two different languages. Every interaction carried an unspoken tension, like we were both aware that something important was being avoided. My mom started involving my sibling more in decisions she used to make alone. She'd ask their opinion on things that affected the whole family, then glance at me as if waiting for a reaction. I stayed neutral. I nodded when appropriate. I didn't offer extra input. That seemed to bother her more than disagreement ever had. It was as if my silence was questioning her authority in a way words never could. At the same time, my sibling began acting differently around me. Not openly hostile, just cautious. Like they sensed the shift and didn't know where to stand. One night, while we were both in the kitchen late, they asked quietly, "Are you mad at Mom?" The question caught me off guard. I shrugged and said I wasn't mad, just thinking. That answer felt safer than the truth. Families don't always know what to do with honesty. Work became my escape. It was the one place where effort felt visible, where contribution had clear outcomes. If I showed up, things moved forward. If I didn't, someone noticed. That contrast made home feel even heavier. I started staying later, taking on extra tasks, not because I wanted praise, but because the structure felt grounding. My mom noticed the longer hours. One evening, she commented that I was barely home anymore, her tone sharp with something between accusation and concern. I told her I had a lot going on. She nodded but didn't seem satisfied. Control doesn't fade quietly. It looks for new ways to reassert itself. A few days later, she brought up the future. Not gently. She talked about plans, expectations, and responsibilities like they were already decided. Where I should be heading, what I should be contributing, what she believed was fair. She spoke with certainty, as if my life was a shared project she was managing. For the first time, I felt anger rise clearly, not blurred by guilt or doubt. It wasn't loud anger. It was steady, focused. I listened without interrupting, my face calm, my hands folded. Inside, I was cataloging every assumption she made about me, every space where she didn't ask what I wanted. When she finished, she waited. That pause was familiar. It was the moment where I was supposed to agree, explain myself, or defend my position. My heart beat faster, but I didn't fill the silence. I simply said, "I hear you," and left the room. That night, she knocked on my door for the first time in a long while. She stood there with crossed arms, asking why I was being distant. I told her I needed space to think. She frowned, clearly uncomfortable with an answer she couldn't argue with. Space is threatening when someone is used to closeness on their own terms. Behind her frustration, I saw something else flicker briefly.
Fear.
Not of losing me completely, but of losing influence. That realization changed how I saw the conflict. This wasn't just about contribution or effort. It was about control, about whose version of the story would define my role in the family. My dad started checking in more after that. Small questions. Long looks. One evening, he sat next to me on the couch and said, "Your mom worries about you." I wanted to laugh at how simple that sounded compared to how complicated everything felt. I asked him if he worried too. He hesitated, then said he just wanted peace in the house. That answer hurt more than I expected. Peace for who? I wondered.
And at what cost?
Extended family sensed the tension too. Phone calls came more often. Casual comments about family harmony slipped into conversations. No one asked directly what was wrong, but everyone seemed to have an opinion on how things should be. The pressure to smooth things over began to grow, subtle but persistent. One afternoon, my aunt invited me out for coffee. Away from the house, she finally spoke more freely. She told me my mom had always struggled with letting go, with seeing her children as separate adults. She said it like an explanation, maybe even an excuse. I listened, understanding but unconvinced. Knowing the reason doesn't erase the impact. As weeks passed, my mom's comments became sharper, less frequent but more pointed. Little remarks about gratitude, about effort, about how some people don't realize how much they're given. Each one landed like a test. Would I react? Would I defend myself? Would I go back to the version of me that absorbed blame quietly? I didn't. Instead, I focused on building something outside the family narrative. My routines, my goals, my sense of self that wasn't defined by approval. It felt empowering and lonely at the same time. Growth often does. But the closer I got to clarity, the more resistance I felt at home. My mom began revisiting old stories, rewriting memories in ways that painted her as the sole provider and me as the passive recipient. Hearing those versions repeated out loud made my stomach twist. It wasn't just disagreement anymore. It was erasure. One night, during a small family dinner, she told a story about how hard it had been raising me, emphasizing sacrifice and struggle. Everyone listened politely. I stared at my plate, feeling like I was watching my own history being reshaped in real time. I wanted to correct her. I wanted to speak my truth. The words pressed against my chest, demanding release. But I stayed silent. That silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was restraint. I was waiting, even if I didn't know exactly for what. Because deep down I could feel it. This wasn't going to stay quiet forever. The longer things went unspoken, the heavier they became. Something was coming. A confrontation.
A choice.
A moment where staying silent would no longer be possible. And when that moment arrived, I wasn't sure if it would finally clear the air or tear the family apart in a way none of us were ready for. The tension didn't explode all at once. It tightened slowly, like a rope being pulled from both ends. Every day felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I could sense my mom watching me, measuring my movements, my tone, my silences. And I knew she could feel it too, the shift she couldn't control, the distance she didn't know how to close. The closer we got to the new year, the more urgent everything felt. Family gatherings were coming up again. Birthdays, anniversaries, moments that required smiling faces and polite conversations. My mom started reminding me of them, dropping hints about expectations. We should all be together. Family shows up. People notice when someone pulls away. Her words were calm, but the message underneath was sharp. I nodded, like always. But inside, I was bracing myself. One evening, I overheard her on the phone. She didn't know I was standing in the hallway. She was talking to a relative, her voice low but firm, explaining how some people don't realize how much they've been given, and how ingratitude hurts more than effort ever could. I didn't hear my name, but I didn't need to. Hearing my story told without me, and it felt like a quiet betrayal. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying moments from my childhood, lining them up next to her words, trying to understand how two people could live the same life and remember it so differently. I wondered if she truly believed what she was saying, or if believing it made things easier for her. The next morning, my dad asked if we could talk. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many conversations had been avoided. He spoke carefully, choosing words like they might break. He said my mom felt disrespected, that she thought I was pulling away out of spite, that she didn't understand why I wouldn't just talk it out. Asked him why talking it out always seemed to mean explaining myself until I was exhausted. He didn't have an answer. He just sighed and said he didn't want the family to fall apart. Neither did I. But I was starting to realize that keeping things together by shrinking myself wasn't really holding anything together at all. The pressure kept building. Messages from relatives. Invitations framed as obligations. Comments about how time is precious and life is short. All true, and somehow all used to make me feel guilty. I felt like I was standing at the center of a storm made of expectations, each one pulling me back toward the version of myself that was easier for everyone else. My mom became more direct. One afternoon, she cornered me in the living room and asked, "What changed?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was sharp with frustration, edged with something close to desperation. I told her I was figuring things out. She shook her head and said families don't work that way. That pulling back hurts people. That love requires contribution. That word again. Contribution. It echoed through me, heavier every time she said it. I wanted to ask her what counted. I wanted to ask why my effort had an expiration date. I wanted to ask why love always felt like a transaction with invisible rules. But the words stayed stuck. I could feel that if I spoke then, it would turn into something I wasn't ready for yet.
So I didn't.
She walked away angry, and the house felt colder after that. A few days later, a family dinner was planned. Not a holiday, not a celebration, just one of those we should all sit down together nights. I knew what it really was. A setup. A moment where things would finally be said, whether I wanted them to be or not. All day, my stomach was tight. I went through work on autopilot, barely hearing what people were saying. By the time I got home, the table was already set. My mom moved around the kitchen with forced cheer, talking more than usual. My dad was quiet. My sibling avoided my eyes. As we sat down, the air felt thick. Every clink of silverware sounded too loud. Conversations stayed on the surface. Weather, schedules, small talk that meant nothing. I could feel everyone waiting for the real reason we were there. Then my mom put her fork down. She looked at me, really looked at me, and said my name in a way that made my chest tighten. She started talking about family values, about sacrifice, about how hurtful it is when someone withdraws instead of communicating. Her voice trembled slightly, whether from emotion or anger. I couldn't tell. I felt every eye at the table turn toward me. This was it. The moment that had been building since Christmas dinner. The moment where silence would no longer be neutral. I could feel my heart pounding, my palms damp, my throat tight. Part of me wanted to stand up and leave. Another part wanted to finally tell my side, to say everything I had been holding back for years. My mom kept talking, her words gaining momentum. She mentioned respect. She mentioned appreciation. She mentioned how hard she had worked, how much she had given. Each sentence felt like it was stacking pressure on my chest, daring me to respond. I glanced at my dad. He looked torn, exhausted, like he was already mourning the peace he knew was slipping away. My siblings stared at the table. No one else spoke. The silence after my mom finished felt endless. I took a slow breath. I could hear it in my ears. I could feel every choice I'd ever made pressing down on this single moment. I knew that whatever I said next would change things. Maybe forever. I opened my mouth, and just as I was about to speak, my mom added one last sentence, quiet but cutting, something she had clearly been holding back. That sentence landed like a spark near dry wood. And in that instant, I knew there was no going back. That last sentence hung in the air, heavier than anything she'd said before. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. That's what made it worse. She said she'd been covering for me for years. That she had protected my image with relatives and friends because she didn't want people to know how little I had really done. She said it calmly, almost kindly, like she was explaining a fact I should already understand. Something inside me went still. I realized then that this wasn't just about how she saw me. It was about a story she had been telling others while I wasn't in the room. A version of me that depended on her generosity, her patience, her silence. And suddenly, all those strange comments from relatives, the side looks, the careful advice about being more grateful, it all made sense. I felt exposed and blindsided at the same time. Before I could respond, my siblings shifted in their chair. I hadn't expected them to speak at all, but they did. Their voice was hesitant, like they were stepping into unfamiliar territory. They said they didn't realize Mom felt that way. They said they always thought I handled a lot behind the scenes. The room froze again, but this time the tension shifted direction. My mom turned toward them sharply. She corrected them almost immediately, brushing off their comment as misunderstanding. She doubled down, explaining that what looks like help isn't the same as real responsibility. Her tone grew firmer, more defensive. It felt less like a conversation and more like a performance she needed to finish. That's when I understood the twist I hadn't seen coming. This wasn't just a private conflict between my mom and me anymore. It was public. It involved how others saw me, how my role had been defined without my consent. And once other people started questioning that version of events, the stakes changed. My dad finally spoke, his voice quiet but strained. He said he thought we were being too hard on each other, that maybe things had gotten mixed up over time. He didn't take sides, but the fact that he spoke at all broke the pattern. My mom looked at him like he'd crossed an invisible line. She stood up from the table. When she did, the room felt smaller, tighter. She said she was tired of being misunderstood, tired of carrying everything, tired of being the only one who noticed when things weren't fair. Her words came faster now, emotions spilling through the careful control she usually kept. She said families fall apart when people stop appreciating what's been done for them. I was still sitting there, heart pounding, realizing something important. This wasn't a moment where truth would magically fix everything. This was a moment where speaking up could rewrite the entire family dynamic, or confirm the version she'd already shared with everyone else. I finally spoke, but not the way I'd imagined all those nights alone. I didn't list sacrifices. I didn't argue point by point. I said something simple. I said I didn't know she felt she had to cover for me, because no one had ever told me there was a problem until Christmas dinner. Her reaction was immediate. She said that was exactly the issue. That I was always unaware. That needing things explained proved her point. Her voice cracked with frustration, and for the first time, I saw how invested she was in being right. Not understood.
Right.
The conversation spiraled from there. Every sentence uncovered something new. Old resentments, unspoken expectations, moments remembered differently. It felt like pulling at a thread and watching years unravel. My sibling looked overwhelmed. My dad kept rubbing his temples. No one was winning. No one was being healed. Then my mom said something that shifted everything again. She mentioned a decision she'd been considering. Something about changes. About support being reevaluated. About how things might look different if I continued pulling away. She didn't explain further, but she didn't need to. The implication was clear. This conflict wasn't just emotional anymore. It could affect my stability, my future, my sense of security. That realization sent a chill through me. I had thought this was about recognition, about respect, about being seen. I hadn't fully grasped how much power was tied up in the narrative she controlled. If she truly believed I hadn't contributed, then in her mind, withdrawing support was justified. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was tense in a sharper way, like everyone understood that something irreversible had just been placed on the table. I stood up slowly, not because I wanted to leave, but because sitting felt impossible. My legs felt unsteady. I said I needed time to think, that I couldn't have this conversation properly under pressure. My mom scoffed lightly, saying that avoidance wasn't the same as maturity. The word stung, but I didn't react. As I walked toward my room, I felt every eye follow me. Behind me, I could hear my mom still talking, still explaining, still shaping the story even as I stepped away from it. For the first time, that scared me more than it hurt. Behind the closed door, I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. My phone buzzed with a message from my sibling asking if I was okay. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the screen, thinking about how quickly things had escalated, how fast the ground beneath me seemed to be shifting. This wasn't just about a comment at Christmas dinner anymore. It was about control, reputation, and what happens when silence stops serving the people who benefited from it most. I didn't know what my next move would be. I didn't know how far my mom was willing to go. I only knew that whatever happened next would force a choice I could no longer avoid. And the closer that choice came, the more I realized that smiling and stopping had set something much bigger in motion, something that was no longer fully in my control. I didn't sleep that night. I packed and unpacked my bag twice without knowing why, then sat on the edge of my bed listening to the house settle. Every sound felt louder than usual. I kept replaying my mom's words, not just from that dinner, but from years ago, moments I had brushed aside because it was easier than questioning them. By morning, the fog in my head cleared into something solid. I wasn't calm, but I was certain. At breakfast, my mom acted like nothing had happened. She spoke about errands and plans, her voice steady, practiced. That normal tone finally snapped something in me. Asked if we could talk, really talk, without an audience and without turning it into a performance. She hesitated, then agreed, her jaw tight. We sat in the living room, facing each other. No phones. No distractions. The quiet was heavy, but different this time. I told her I needed to say my piece, without being interrupted. To my surprise, she nodded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I explained. I talked about the help that never counted because it was expected. About how being reliable turned me invisible. About Christmas dinner and how humiliating it felt to have my worth questioned publicly. I told her I had stopped explaining myself because I was tired of defending a life she had already judged. She tried to interrupt once, then stopped. Her face shifted between disbelief and irritation, then something softer I couldn't quite read. When I finished, I said the hardest part out loud. I said that if she truly believed I had never contributed anything, then there was nothing more I could prove. And that meant I had to start choosing myself, even if that made her uncomfortable. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Then she spoke, and her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. She said she hadn't realized how much she depended on me being the easy one. She admitted that she measured contribution by visibility, by things she could point to and control. She said she felt like she was losing me, and fear had turned into criticism. It wasn't an apology. Not fully. But it was closer to honesty than we had ever been. My dad joined us partway through the conversation, drawn in by the raised voices and sudden silence. For once, he didn't just try to smooth things over. He said he had seen how much I carried quietly, that he should have spoken up sooner. Hearing that made my chest ache in a way I wasn't prepared for. My sibling came in too, and the conversation widened. Stories came out. Misunderstandings. Assumptions. We didn't agree on everything, but the truth was finally in the room, messy and unavoidable. By the end, my mom said something I didn't expect. She said she was willing to rethink the way she talked about me to others. Willing to stop framing herself as the only one holding things together. She said it wouldn't be easy, but she would try. That felt like resolution. Like the storm had finally broken. But then came the twist. That afternoon, my aunt called. She said she'd heard there was tension and wanted to check in. During the conversation, she mentioned something casually without knowing the impact it would have. She said my mom had been telling relatives for years that I preferred not to take on responsibility, that I was happier being supported. I felt the ground shift under me again. When I brought it up later, my mom went quiet. She admitted it was easier to tell that story than to admit she struggled with letting go. Easier than explaining why I was always there, but rarely acknowledged. She hadn't seen it as harmful. She thought she was protecting the family image. That's when I realized the real climax of this story wasn't the argument or the confrontation. It was understanding that even when conflicts feel resolved, their echoes live on in the stories people tell about you. I made a decision that night. A calm one. I told my mom I loved her, but I needed space, not as punishment, not out of anger, but to build a life where my worth wasn't debated at the dinner table. I told her I would stay connected, but not at the cost of disappearing again. She cried. I didn't. That surprised both of us. Over the next few weeks, I moved forward with plans I had quietly been preparing. New routines, new boundaries, conversations that were shorter but clearer. My mom struggled at first, reaching out more than before, then pulling back. But something had changed. She no longer spoke about me the same way. I could feel it in how relatives talked to me, in the shift of tone, in the absence of those careful, pitying comments. Just when I thought the story was ending, I found out something else. My mom started therapy. She didn't announce it. My dad mentioned it offhand one evening, like it was no big deal. But it was. It meant she had finally turned inward instead of outward. It meant the narrative was changing, not just for me, but for her too. The unexpected twist wasn't revenge or triumph. It was growth, messy, imperfect, and still unfolding. The last time we sat down for dinner together, months later, there was no grand moment, no speech. Just a quiet acknowledgement when my mom asked my opinion and waited for the answer. When she said thank you and meant it.
I smiled then.
Not the polite smile I wore at Christmas dinner. Not the one that hid everything. This time it was real. And I knew that stopping had never been about withdrawing love. It had been about finally choosing where to give it. The months that followed didn't turn everything perfect, but they made things clearer. That mattered more than I expected. I settled into my own routines, ones that didn't revolve around anticipating someone else's moods or proving my value in small, invisible ways. Mornings felt lighter. Evenings felt quieter. For the first time in a long while, my life felt like it belonged to me. My relationship with my mom didn't magically reset. We spoke less often at first, then more steadily. The conversations were shorter, more careful, but also more honest. When tension came up, it didn't explode the way it used to. Sometimes it just sat there, uncomfortable but manageable. Other times, we actually talked it through. Not perfectly, but genuinely. She never formally apologized for Christmas dinner. I used to think I needed those exact words to move on. Over time, I realized I needed change more than apologies. And change showed up in small, meaningful ways. She stopped making comments about contribution. She stopped comparing. She started asking instead of assuming. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. My dad changed too in quieter ways. He checked in more. He spoke up when things felt unfair. It wasn't a full transformation, but it was effort, and effort counts when it's sincere. My sibling and I grew closer, bonded by what we'd both witnessed and survived in different ways. We talked more openly about expectations, about family roles, about how easy it is to get stuck playing a part you never auditioned for. Extended family adjusted as well. Some relationships grew warmer once the old narrative faded. Others stayed distant, tied too tightly to the version of the story they preferred. I learned not to chase understanding from everyone. That lesson alone felt like freedom. Looking back, I understand now why that comment at Christmas dinner cut so deeply. It wasn't just about being told I hadn't contributed. It was about realizing how long I had been measuring myself by standards that were never clearly defined, always shifting, always just out of reach. It was about seeing how silence can be mistaken for absence, and how kindness can be mistaken for weakness. I learned that contribution isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with receipts or applause. Sometimes it looks like consistency. Sometimes it looks like emotional labor. Sometimes it looks like holding things together until you realize it's costing you too much. Stopping didn't mean giving up. It meant redirecting my energy toward places where it could actually grow. It meant choosing boundaries over burnout. It meant understanding that love doesn't require self-erasure to be real. There were moments I doubted myself. Moments I wondered if I had overreacted, if I should have just stayed quiet like before. Those doubts faded each time I noticed how much lighter my chest felt, how much steadier my thoughts were. Peace has a way of confirming hard decisions. The biggest takeaway wasn't about family conflict or holiday drama. It was about identity, about how easily we accept labels placed on us by people who benefit from us staying small, about how powerful it can be to pause, smile, and stop participating in narratives that don't honor your truth. I don't know what future holidays will look like. Maybe they'll be warm and easy. Maybe they'll still carry a little tension. But I know this. I won't be sitting at the table wondering if I matter. I won't be measuring my worth by someone else's approval. And I won't be afraid to step back if respect slips again. Sometimes, growth doesn't come from fighting harder. It comes from stepping back and letting the truth surface on its own. From letting silence do the work words couldn't. From choosing yourself without turning it into a battle. That Christmas dinner started as a moment of humiliation. It ended up being the moment I stopped disappearing. And that choice changed everything.